Hey everyone. Of course, one bad thing about printing this out on paper is, I'm kind of like to recycle and conserve resources, but one good thing about it is the battery can't go out and the hard drive can't crash, nothing like that. So anyway, today I am speaking on the topic, and I'm going to be barely able to graze it because this is a huge topic. You could probably spend all 52 weeks of the year on it, but on the topic of symbolism in the Bible. And so if you've ever read a series of books or a series of movies that have a very woven together plot, and for example, maybe in a later episode, something that seemed insignificant had happened back in the first episode, and you thought, oh, how cool it was, the author wove all that together. And I never saw it. I heard Lost had a lot of that in it, but life in a way is kind of like that, but our human life. So God's the master author, and he has woven so many cross symbols and things that happen in history that you recognize them later on. And so to me, it's kind of like that, but, million times more complex than a human author could have ever come up with. But so God from looking at the Bible, it appears to me that God just loves symbolism. And why? I don't know. Maybe that's just the way it is. But he uses it so much that's why I conclude it's very important to him. Now, so I'll enter this internet search. How many symbols are in the Bible? Well, surprisingly, I didn't see, at least the 5 minutes I spent through the results, of anybody that put out an opinion on it. Because usually when you ask an opinion on the internet, you get some answers. But I didn't see anybody that had what I was really looking for. I did see a list, though. One of them has listed over 500 symbols. And I'm thinking there's got to be at least a couple thousand symbols, parables, metaphors, that kind of thing in the Bible. It's a lot. I mean, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. I guarantee you open a page in the Bible, it would not take very many times where you would touch on some kind of symbolism. Now, there's a couple things about symbolism. The lessons we learn from them are not straightforward as they are in plain instruction. It just tells you straight out. So we run the risk of misinterpreting a symbol. And when we do that, we misinterpret or misunderstand what God is trying to teach us. And I think as Christians as a group, we both underdo it and overdo it sometimes. And by underdoing it, I'm talking about if there is some symbology in there that we don't appreciate, like we may not realize that was symbolic. And when we overdo it, we see something in there and we say it is symbolic, and we kind of go off on a tangent researching that. And it's hard to know when we've done that because it's it's not plain as day most of the time, the symbolism. So to give an example of what I'm thinking about, it's in and I may be in the minority of opinion here, by the way, so if that's it, fine. But I'll use the parable of the 10 virgins. The main point of that parable is to make sure we don't let the oil run out of our lamps. But a lot has been made about the fact it was 5 and 5. And I've heard many times that people believe that means in the latter days, exactly half the church is going to fall away based on that. I personally do not believe that, but the way I see it working is this: when you tell a story or a parable, you've got to have some context. So some of the facts mentioned in there aren't part of the symbology. Like if you have a group that does have oil and a group that doesn't, of 10, well, first of all, you just pick a number, 10, and it could just be part of the story, 5 and 5. Does it necessarily have special significance? Well, if I'm mistaken, then I'm missing out on a valuable lesson. So I could be the one really missing out here, because that might give insight into some future events. On the other hand, if you're not mistaken, then the ones that believe that are going down the wrong path and will reach some incorrect conclusions. So although I haven't given any solution to that, I just point out that the difficulty with symbology is it can lead you down the wrong path if you don't interpret it correctly. And it's hard to know if you're doing that sometimes. So the way I look at things like that, those are useful things to look about, but I wouldn't base other doctrines and thoughts on something like that that's not as concrete as other things. So next week we're celebrating a season that, in my opinion, is probably the most symbol-rich holy day we have. Passover and the days in Leavell are just overflowing with symbology. We have all that symbolism from the first Passover and the Exodus, and then we have all that symbology that Christ introduced to us, and Paul talked about it later, of the New Testament Passover and all that stuff. So it's like shooting fish in a barrel, but just to start with, we have the symbol of the blood of the lamb on the doorpost protecting the firstborn. Contrast that with the blood of the lamb with a capital L being shed to save his firstborn, and that'll be in the first resurrection. So there's all kinds of rich symbology there. So some symbols are easier to interpret than others. All those I just said, not too many people are going to disagree that that's what all that means. One that's even easier to understand is the bread and wine in the Passover service that represents Christ's broken body and blood. And the reason I say it's easier is he comes out and says, this is a symbol and this is what it means. So it spells it out. But to give you an idea of how people can complicate anything, there's not agreement on that. I'm sure all of you know, the Catholic Church feels that means it literally turns into the blood and literally turns into the body of Jesus. They call it transubstantiation. And it's not like some little side doctrine. They get really worked up about it. As a matter of fact, I was reading some history stuff, and during the reign of Queen Mary, they called her Bloody Mary, in the mid-1500s, that was like the test commandment almost, not a commandment, but a test doctrine to check Protestants. If you didn't believe that, then they knew you were a heretic, and many people were killed over saying that they wouldn't believe that. And of course, that wasn't the only thing, but because you were rebelling against the Catholic Church, that was signified you didn't believe that part of it. But anyway, that's a little bit off topic, I guess. So in the original Passover, God told the Israelites to select a lamb for sacrifice 4 days before the Passover. And this is Exodus 12, verses 3. I'm just going to read parts of 3 and 6. On the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb. In verse 6, now ye shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. So this bit of instruction sounds like symbolism to me, but it doesn't elaborate on what taking a lamb involves. So it's difficult to say what that symbolism would actually be, you know, interpret it. And so let's say if it is symbolic, is it the separating of the lamb, or is the exact count of 4 days significant in the symbology? Maybe the 4 days is just a byproduct of the whole instruction. Like if you're going to separate out a lamb, you have to do it sometime. So maybe it just was convenient instruction, the time frame or something. So here's the thing though, if it wasn't meant to be symbolic, you're going to waste time searching for meaning when no meaning was actually meant. Maybe it was just some instruction getting ready for the Passover. Maybe, I don't know. Personally, I do think there's some symbolism there, something symbolic about that. It just seemed a little bit unusual to make it so specific 4 days exactly before. But this one's always bugged me because if the 4 days is significant, I can't think of even a plausible reason why it would be, you know, to find it later. So, but anyway, I guess that's just some of the frustration of interpreting symbols. So something a lot easier to interpret. This season is a good time to reflect on the symbol of baptism. And so this is 1 Corinthians 10. And it says, moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud. All passed through the sea. All were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. All ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So there, that explains several of the symbols that was not evident perhaps at the time. I mean, when they're walking through the Dead Sea, they're not thinking, oh, we're symbolizing baptism that will be ultra important in the future, you know, part of the thing God wants us to do. So changing subjects a little bit, I thought I'd talk a few minutes about the 10 Commandments, although that probably be more aligned with Pentecost, since that was closer to the time frame it was given, or those were given. But the 10 Commandments are a good example of something that's not symbolic. When it says you shall not steal, that is easy enough to understand. Plain, no symbology there at all. But one of the 10 Commandments does specifically ban some symbolism, and that's Exodus 24, 20, verse 4. It says, you shall not make for yourselves a carved image in any likeness that is in heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. So part of the symbology of the 10 Commandments, and this is where it comes into, it doesn't exactly say this in the Bible, but I feel like the fact that they were on stone, very symbolic. And to me, personally, one of the main reasons I feel like the Sabbath is still in effect, because you just about don't get more durable writing material than stone. I mean, matter of fact, in history, a lot of what we get is from inscriptions and stuff on temples and other places, because a lot of regular writing material just doesn't survive 3,000 years. It would be cool if we could find these stones. I don't know where they got lost to, but see what they look like. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? But that's digression as well, but also made me lose my place. But it's just, and it kind of lets you know that that all of those 10 are permanent. You don't question them; they're on stone. So Now, in most pictures you see of the Ten Commandments, you see some written on one side and some written on the other. I have heard, and it's not said in the Bible, so you don't know for sure, but it was a full set of all 10 on both sides. More like a legal kind of make yourself a copy kind of thing. But regardless, especially in that second case, that's an awful lot of text for a tablet small enough for one man to carry two of them. And so this is just a thought, just wondering if the lettering on it was smaller than the technology of the day that man had, a technology of the day, like maybe almost like laser etching or something, that was also a miracle, that people could see, okay, man didn't create this. This had to come from somewhere else. Now, could they have really fine carving on stone back then? Maybe, and maybe I'm completely full of it on that one. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw out that thought. So there was more than that to convince people that Moses had seen God. I mean, his face was, shining like the sun almost, and they scared of that. So there was plenty besides that. But later on, it would have been enduring when people saw those tablets. Of course, I think they were in the cut arc, so nobody really saw them anyway, so I don't know. So symbolism is important to God. I feel like that's easy to say, but it's also important to man. The two main Christian holidays, Christmas and Easter, are chock full of symbolism. The difference is none of it points to the true God. For example, the only part of Christmas that is about the real God are the literal parts of it, talking about the birth of Jesus. And of course, that gets that story is somewhat mangled and got incorrect facts, but it's not symbolic. All the symbolism with Christmas, mistletoe, the actual day it is on, Christmas trees, etc., all point to pagan gods, except for Santa, and that's more of a modern invention pointing to a God substitute. So, and it might have pagan origins. I don't think it does. But so, Easter is really no better. Its name is symbolic, referring to Oestre, and which is a pagan goddess. Although that's not quite as bad as it sounds. They didn't go out and name it intentionally after a pagan goddess. But that time of spring, that month, was based on that name, and that's how it got to be. But it's still the name of a pagan goddess. Same way we've got our days of the week, and a whole bunch of our months are named after pagan gods. But one of the most important symbols to man is the cross in the shape of a small t, and that almost universally recognized. I say almost, because I don't know what people in North Korea think, but recognized as a symbol for Christianity. And representing the cross that Christ died on. So there's a couple of problems here. For one, we really don't know the shape of the cross that Christ was died on. It is possible it was that shape. I was reading, and it said the Romans used all three different shapes of crosses at different times, and so we don't know for sure. But the other two shapes were just the plain state, or more, and either that one would be more likely, or with the T on top, so it looks like a capital T. The crossbeam in the middle would be the most difficult to actually do because of supporting the weight of a man. It's easier if you can put it on top or not have a crossbeam at all. I personally think it's probably the big T was, because it's hard to carry a whole pole, but you could carry the crossbeam a lot easier. I think it probably was a crossbeam, but it kind of irrelevant, I guess. But so, and I've read this before, but it's been a long time. So I'm going to read Vine's dictionary for the entry for staros, which is the English word cross. And it denotes primarily an upright, paler state. So I'll just interrupt here. So the word cross in Greek is referring to the stake and does not include the crossbeam. That doesn't mean there wasn't a crossbeam, because either way, he's still up on the pole, whether there was or was not a crossbeam. All right, but the noun and verb staru, to fasten to a stake or a pale, are originally to be distinguished. In other words, not the same thing at all as the ecclesiastical form of a tomb beam cross. The shape of that cross had its origin in ancient Chaldea and was used as a symbol of the god Tammuz, being in the shape of the mystic Tau, which is the initial of his name, in that country and in adjacent lands, including Egypt. Now that T was the T with the cross, so it looks like a small t to us. And so that stood for Tau, or the letter Tammuz. Now significantly, this Tammuz is mentioned in the Bible, and it's in Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 8:13, it says, "And he said to me, turn again, and you will see greater abomination than they are doing. So he brought me to the door of the north gate of the Lord's house, and to my dismay, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. And then he said to me, have you seen this, O son of man? Turn again, and you will see greater abomination than this. So he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, and there, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple and their faces to the east, and they were worshiping the sun toward the east." So there we see a lot of Easter symbology. Facing the east, so sunrise service, and then of course the small t referencing Tammuz. So those that defend Christmas and Easter would say, and we're being too picky about that kind of stuff. People that celebrate it don't really think about all that. They probably don't even know about it, a lot of them. And isn't focusing on God the important thing? Well, I agree that focusing on God is the important thing, but how we do it is also important. And, we've seen that symbolism is important to God and man. God's holy days is just covered up with symbology. I feel like we're going to hear plenty about that specifics in the next couple of days, because we always do, and rightly so. But God's symbolism draws us closer to him and points us toward him and what he has for man, whereas man's symbolism pushes us away from God. And it's pretty obvious which one we should embrace.